Hey, I want to introduce you to Dale Bertram, Dr. Dale Bertram.
Dale.
Just call him Dale.
Dale.
His students call him Dr. Bertram.
Sometimes.
Sometimes it depends on if you're near them or not,
Yeah.
right?
It's whatever they call me behind my back. So
Yeah,
I
there's no
seriously, they
telling.
don't think I can hear.
Right.
Yeah.
Dale and I grew older together in West Virginia. I don't know either one of us grew up, but we grew older together in West Virginia. We've been friends for over 52 years. And I don't know many who have stuck with each other from high school days all the way through. But it is an unusual relationship. We are truly best friends. I've mentioned this before, but Dale and I not only grew up in West Virginia, we lived together in New Mexico. He was best man at my wedding. I officiated his wedding, which, by the way, is coming up. The 37th year of them being married will be on April 15th.
Tax day. Can't
He
forget
said
it.
that way I can't forget it. So anyway, Dale has PhD in marriage and family therapy. He has taught in a number of places and universities. He's been the head of the department, marriage and family, and several things. You might want to ask him about that. But one of them was Abilene Christian University. He's presently with Campbellsville University, teaching, and head of now the interim. He's an interim dean,
Program director.
program director of a new PhD program at Campbellsville University, getting that off the ground. And he's helped a number of universities not only stay accredited, but help them get started in their PhD and our online PhD. You can get a PhD in marriage and family therapy totally online and be supervised online and even counsel or provide therapy online. So he comes in with a PhD in communication. I've got a master's plus a number of hours toward and PhD in marriage and family. I come in with communication. Our perspectives are both coming from a general systems theory. You have in front of you a booklet that I took a long time. Does everybody have one? A booklet? You have a pen? Okay, Jonah, did you not pass those out? Jonah is my hander-outer. I spent hours putting this together for you, and it's just several blank pages so you can write down notes. If you don't have a pen, there's probably a pen in the chair behind you, and or see Mike and he'll loan you his. So raise your hand if you want a booklet. They're just blank pages. Occasionally we may have a question for you to ask your spouse or your spouse-to-be, or if you're just not even beginning the date yet, maybe somebody that you would just want to develop a deeper relationship with. We'll provide some questions for you to deal with. But enough of that. Dale is going to be talking about couples in the context of families. And I find this presentation and what he's about to give to us to be extremely enlightening, and it's going to be helpful for many of you. The light bulbs are going to go off on some of you. It's going to really be good. So, Maria, you have pulled triple duty. Thank you for doing all that you do. It's fantastic. Handing out the... Okay, so everybody has one of those. I really put in a lot of effort putting those together for you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, and you can draw pictures on them or whatever. Okay, Dale Bertram, and he's going to be presenting first, and there'll be some times that we'll be interact with each other. Maybe something I'll interrupt and say, hey, wait, give us an example or something. We'll have some dialogue through this as well, and it'd be quite informal and somewhat spontaneous, or at least improv.
Improv, yeah.
So, Dale Bertram.
Thank you all. Could we begin with prayer? I always like to begin these with prayer. Let's pray with me. Father, thank you so much for every person that's here tonight, and we know that you've created us to be wired for connection, wired for relationship, and Father, we know that within the family, within couple relationships, you have done some of your best work in building people and healing people and helping people to grow, and We thank you for this because we know that we truly are created in your image, and we know that when we as people connect and marry people who are also created in your image, that sometimes, even though we're both created in your image, that there's differences there, and navigating those differences and working through them are some of the best places that we have to grow. Father, we pray that over the next couple of days that the things we do will help each person here, including Kevin and I, to grow and to change and to become more like your son, Jesus. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So I always like to start with the Bible, and I really appreciate these Old Testament stories, and they're true stories. I call them stories because they are stories, but stories can be true stories, right? And these Old Testament narratives, some of them are very rich in letting us see about families. So two of my favorite families are the ones we see here from Abraham to Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, through those 4 generations. And then when we can look at later, Jesse, David's father, through Solomon, we see quite a bit of different things in those families. Those families are amazing. Those families are extraordinary in the lessons that we can learn. So we often get kind of a superficial view of these families in Bible class and when we're kids, and no criticisms, because a lot of what we would see in both families are things you really wouldn't want your 4 or 5-year-old child to know about or to contemplate. Those are things that come later. But sometimes we grow up and we become adults, and we never look at what I call the texture of the story. And I think those stories are there because when we look, in part, they're there for a lot of reasons, but in part, they help us to look at our families and consider our families and what goes on in them as well. So let's look at this family. We see this fella named Abram, as he was called at the time, and his wife Sarai, and they were plugging along, and they were 70 plus, and God tells them in Genesis 12 that he invites them to go and to leave their familiar surroundings, and he makes this promise, a promise that's said again in Genesis 15, Genesis 22, and on, that he's going to make him a father of many nations. Now, Abraham and Sarai are older. She's past childbearing years, and I just can't imagine what it was like for them. I lived in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, when I was a young man in my early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, and one of the things I saw there were people that left places that they lived all their life to move to Florida, and they just had a difficult time adjusting, even though they thought they were moving for 12 months of play in the sand, and it just didn't always work out that way for them. Hardly ever worked out that way for them. So here's a guy that was set, pretty wealthy guy, pretty set, had things going his way, except he didn't have children, and God makes this promise, and so they believe this promise. And you know the rest of the story, but I invite you to think about it with your adult eyes, your adult ears, not the 5-year-old version of this, but to think about this as it is. Real people, a real couple, past 70, that's told to move, and they move, and they have this promise that they're going to have a baby, and how's this going to happen when she's past childbearing years? Well, you know what happens. You know what happens. She gets impatient, and she persuades her husband to have a baby with a handmaiden. And then what happens then? There's what? Jealousy. And so we talk about that, briefly, sometimes in adult Bible classes. But I invite you to think about what that looked like. 70 plus years of age, they're having this faith in God. Then all of a sudden they're saying, no way, this is going to happen. We've got to do this in another way. God surely wants another way. They have the baby. And what do you think that was like for Sarah? Anybody? Once that baby came along, Ishmael, what do you think when Ishmael came along? What was that like? What do you think the dynamic was like between Abraham and Sarah and the handmaiden and little Ishmael? Any guesses? Any thoughts? Pretty intense, yeah. And sir, yeah, intense, yeah. What else? That's true, but real intense. I'm sure it was just terribly intense. Yeah, she's out of the circle. She kind of get pushed aside there. Cooing this baby. It's their baby. She's out, and it was her idea. So she probably has jealousy on steroids, or definitely, right? And so there's just this huge rift, and then the rest of the story. They have Isaac. Now Isaac comes along, and what happens to Ishmael? He kind of gets shuffled aside. So one of the things we don't think about, we're going to see it through all these generations, is what happens to the people that get shuffled aside. Maybe some of you were shuffled aside in your families. I don't want to be hurtful, but it happens to a lot of people that you just know that you weren't a favorite person, or maybe you were a favorite person and in the family, and you look at your siblings that obviously weren't, and sometimes there's a rift that continues from generation for a number of years because of something like that. We know what that's like. We see it. We don't have to look at this ancient story because we look around in our families and our neighborhoods and our friends. We see things just like this happening. It's an ancient story that has contemporary application. It repeats itself over and over again in generation after generation after generation. I had a friend, Jay Jordan, that had a band, a Christian band in Cincinnati, Ohio, a number of years ago, last century, in the 20th century. They were just a local band. They played Cincinnati, Louisville, Dayton, Ohio, Lexington, Kentucky, those just around that area, Indianapolis, Indiana. But they had a song that if anybody heard them, it endeared them to them. They always wanted to hear it. Again, it was called Ishmael. I'm not a singer, so I'm not going to sing it, but the lyrics, I think about them all of the time. Why do you want to have Ishmael when Isaac's on the way? Do you think you're better than God? Well, God will have the last say. God's looking out for you. He's going to have his own way. Why do you want to have Ishmael when Isaac's on the way? And, it just resonated with people in so many different ways. And people clapped and people applauded that. But here's something I want you to think about. With church members, with friends, with family members, with people in your neighborhood, what's it like for Ishmael? Ishmael's just a child. And then Ishmael becomes an adult. What's it like for Ishmael to get shoveled aside? That's just something we never talk about in Bible class. That's something we never talk about in the pulpit. But it's a application I invite you to think about. Some of you likely know from experience what it was like to be Ishmael. Because once Isaac comes along, Ishmael's no more. Yeah. So then Isaac, next generation, Isaac gets married and he has these boys. And what happens? Remember the boys' names, anybody? What are the boys' names? Esau and Jacob. There you go. And so we see again kind of a dynamic we see in a lot of families. Esau's whose boy? Daddy's boy. Jacob's mommy's boy. And so we know what happens later on. Isaac's getting old. He's becoming really, really old, and it's time to pass the birthright on to Esau, who owns it, who it's his by all right. And so what Mom says is, "Hey, Jacob, your dad can't see. Your dad's laying there, he's blind. Let's fix it so you look real hairy like your brother. You go in there, and you can get the birthright." And so that happens. And there's some things in this text that we oftentimes don't look at. We don't look at the anguish of dad and with Isaac after he realizes what happens. We don't look at the rage that happened after that with Esau. And so Mom tells Jacob, just get out of town. Leave. And so Jacob leaves. He's in fear of his life because he's afraid his brother's going to kill him. And we know what happens years later. It's a beautiful thing, and it's a thing I always hope it happens in families when they're estranged from each other. Jacob's traveling with his family members and all the people he's with, and he knows Esau's ahead, and he thinks Esau's going to kill me. He might kill everybody. So he sends animals ahead, and he goes out ahead in case he's going to be killed. But instead, Esau runs to him. You ever think about what that looks like? He sees his brother, and he runs to him, and he hugs him. He doesn't kill him. That's a beautiful movie piece. When they do Bible movies, I don't know why they don't do that, because it's such a wonderful, wonderful scene after the anguish of dad. And I really think the anguish of mom, because have you ever made a mistake in your family? I've made mistakes in my family. And that anguish is horrible. And I can't even imagine mom's anguish because she loves this boy, but the boy has to leave so that he doesn't get killed. He's running for his life. And the other brother is embittered for a while, but it turns out, I think, okay for both of them in some ways, because Esau apparently has plenty himself, and they have this good meeting and they go on their ways. So you're starting to see a pattern, because one of the things I'm going to invite you to do in a little bit is to think about patterns in your own family or patterns you see. What's a pattern we're seeing that's developing over 2 generations? One child is favored, one child's not. But then there's a second pattern we haven't even talked about. There's this, one of my favorite stories, Abimelech. I like that story, that saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And I always think about that when I read about this guy named Abimelech in the Bible, this king, because coming back to Abraham and Sarah, they see Abimelech and they're afraid of him, and so they lie, and it's a half lie, and they say, Sarah's my sister. So what does Isaac and Rebekah do? Oh, this is my sister. 2 generations in the same family fool the same king with the same lie. But this is a pattern we're going to see throughout these generations that we're looking at. One generation to generation to generation, there's a favored child and there's an unfavored child. A fellow I know named Christopher Hurd wrote his doctoral dissertation at Southern Methodist University in the Old Testament on what he called the theory of disselection. And he looked at this through these generations, how one family member was deselected. That's what got me on this a number of years ago. I read his dissertation, and he really explored in detail, in depth, what the consequences of being deselected in a family were. Some of you know the consequences of deselection in families and what that can look like. It's a bad thing. And the pattern of lying that happens and deception sometimes in families. Not in all families. Deselection doesn't happen in all families. A pattern of lying doesn't happen in all families. But we see it in some families. And in any of our families, we can look at patterns and say, these patterns are healthy, these patterns are good, but these other ones aren't so healthy, aren't so good. So we come to this third generation, and we see Jacob here, and we'd already looked at that, but Jacob, he has a bunch of kids. By the way, he hadn't had Benjamin yet when the story that we all know about Joseph and his coat of many colors happened. What does Jacob do? What Granddad did? Granddad had selected his dad as favorite, and his uncle Esau wasn't the favorite. Granddad Abraham had selected his granddad as the favorite. His great uncle Ishmael wasn't the favorite. So he did just what came natural, because this is something that I want you to think about, because as we get into things over the weekend, this is going to be a crucial point. We learn to be human in the families we grow up in. Now, that doesn't mean we're stuck and that we're always like the families we grow up in. Sometimes we rejected those things. That we don't want this part of our family. We want this part, but not this part. We want to be different. But where do we learn to be human? In the families we grow up in. That's where we learn to be human. Where did Jacob learn this thing of making one child more valuable than all of his brothers? From dad and granddad. It's the third generation this is happening. But it takes a kind of a tragic turn here. A really tragic turn, because they sell him into slavery. They sell Joseph into slavery. You know the story. They take that coat and they have a ruse that he was killed. So Jacob's not the same again, because Jacob is grieving the loss of a son. Again, this is the part of the story we don't highlight, and we probably really shouldn't highlight in children's Bible classes. If you teach children's Bible classes, obviously you're not going to highlight these things. These are adult themes, not children's themes. And so that man never was the same again. How do I know it? Because later in the text, the brothers say that. They're really worried about their dad. Dad was never the same again. But I want you to see something else about this story that I think is amazing. Absolutely amazing. It backfires in a really big way. Because we know what happens. They've told this lie to Dad. They don't ever come clean with Dad. Dad's miserable. They try to comfort Dad, but they have to keep the lie going. Because what would it mean for their relationship with Dad if they told him they sold brother into slavery? So they keep the lie going, even though it's hurting Dad. And you know what happens with lies? They become toxic. Lies in families become horribly toxic. Like secrets in families become horribly toxic. And so then we fast forward. They go to Egypt. Their brother Joseph's there. He's risen to prominence. He recognizes them. They don't recognize him. And they do their own ruse. He does his own ruse. They take the younger brother Benjamin. First time he's ever met Benjamin, right? Because Benjamin went around before. And they keep him. And the brothers are like just beside themselves, because they said, this is going to kill our dad. Because we had an older brother. And so they keeps him there. He lies to them. Family pattern, only this time it's kind of going to have a reversal effect. They go back, then eventually he discloses who he is, and they have this good time together. So, what we looked at in kind of maybe a slow way, maybe too slow for some of us, because it's kind of the same thing over and over again. I want it to be the same thing over and again. Through 4 generations, a pattern of deselection of someone not favored, kind of cast aside, someone that's favored. And we see in Jacob's family that even after the favorite one is considered dead, none of the other ones rise to favorite status. There has to be another baby come along that becomes the favorite. The whole thing had backfired. So, Kevin, if I can invite you in for a moment, as you listen to this story, as you've heard this with your ear, what are some of the applications you would maybe like to, think about from this story that would apply to 21st century families? Because we're talking about families back then, but it strikes me that nothing we talked about is an ancient story in the sense that these things have happened throughout time. This happens now. No, you're not.
How's that?
Good.
All right. I was wondering about that very same question because we're talking about 4,000 plus years ago in the time of Abraham, like 2,000 years before Christ. Now we're 2,000 years past, and it's stories so long ago. And you've got Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and then Joseph. And you see a whole series of lies and deception. What's ironic to me, I would go back to, before I answer it, what I think is a question of today is when Isaac, so old, and Jacob came in to deceive, to pretend like he's Esau, right? But Esau had already sold his birthright. So Esau coming in to receive the birthright was also a deception. And it's that pattern. I wondered, okay, what about me? I know my family, I know a lot of my family history, not all of it, but as much as I can map out my grandparents and on both sides, the man who was a biological dad, and then some of that story. My mother was, I would say raped, but she was 15 and he was 18, and then they married, and what patterns of behavior from that incident. Then my mother remarried when I was 9, and then they divorced when I was 16. I've got 2 brothers from that marriage, but I didn't learn anything about my history until I was 16. I wondered, okay, where do you say, okay, some of you can relate to this. You grew up in a family where you didn't really have a dad. Maybe you had a figure there, but he wasn't much of a dad, or your dad died early in your life, and you didn't have. And you said, what? And the dad that you did have didn't pay much attention to you. So what do you do when you become a dad? How do you break that cycle? So I'm wondering about the patterns of behavior, and I'm saying, okay, well, I don't want to perpetuate, get the right word, perpetuate the system. I want to be a cycle breaker.
Yeah.
So how do you go about interacting with that family history? Because is there anybody here that didn't have a family history?
Everybody has a family
everybody has
history.
the family history, right?
And I work with students sometimes who were raised in foster care, one foster home after the other, didn't really know their families, but when they do the genogram work, they can do it as well as other people because the history of the foster care system and the whole history of children's homes makes that. And I think that's going to be one of the wonderful things about what we do this weekend is looking at, how we can break some of those patterns in our relationship. Because, we look through this, there's, it's not just the men, they're married to women and they're participating in this together and they become a couple. And one of the things I think that's important for all of us to realize is that when we come into marriage, we bring our family history. Not just the family we grew up in, not just our nuclear family, but the history of generations. Sometimes that's not even explored, or sometimes people really don't know how things were. But by the time you get to Joseph, how much does Joseph really know about Abraham? How much do you know about your great-great-great-grandfather? Really, I know some things about my great-grandparents or I know a little bit about them, but do I really know who they are? No. But how much of who we are is in some ways informed by some things that happened back then. So we're bringing our history in, and our partners are bringing their thing in. And some people don't like that term partner. When Kevin was preaching in Boise, I remember I used that term, that's the term I use, and somebody got offended because they said he's not really pro-marriage. I am pro-marriage, but, it's a marital partner, so I call them a partner. So that marital partner is is bringing their stuff. So they're bringing this history, and we're bringing this history. And how does that history work together? What kinds of things comes out of that mix? But this isn't negative, because we turn the slide and we see that, we've looked at this negative pattern at first, but then the strengths of this family. We always talk about the strengths of this family in Bible classes, as we should with kids, but the strengths are here, and the things we looked at in the previous slide are here. They were godly for the most part. Lying and, kicking his family members out, wasn't. They were focused on this great promise that was made in Genesis 12, again, Genesis 15, Genesis 22, on and on and on. They were focused on that. And then they passed faith down from generation to generation. They passed faith across the generations. And I don't know any of you. I just know Kevin. I know Kevin and his wife Jan did an extraordinary job passing faith across generations to their kids. And I kind of know his mother. His mother was one of my Bible class teachers as a kid. So what she did, and a couple of other people, really helped me as a young person to critically think about Scripture. That's what your mom brought, to me, and a lot of other kids, when she was doing classes, to invite us to critically think. And that was very helpful to me as I navigated teen years and young 20s years. Just wasn't her, but, he has that coming, and his wife's family had, she grew up in the house of faith, and so she had that. So, you look at their kids, they come from these models, but also in both of the families, like any family, I'm not going to talk about dirt on it for anybody. I'm not going to do it, but there's stuff there.
A lot
you know
of stuff.
that. How just raise your hand if I told you that, his kids are fortunate because dad didn't have any dirt to deal with from his family, and his wife didn't have any dirt to deal with her family. How many of you would either think I'm lying or naive? Absolutely. And the probably question is he lying, or is he naive, or is he both? And probably, truthfully, be a little bit of both if I believe that, or really wanting to tell myself a story that's not true. But I think that's what God does. He works through imperfect people. He works through people like all of us that have histories like that, both positive and negative. Even in the worst families, and I'm not saying that in a judgmental way, but with lots of problems, there's strength. I've worked in settings where I did home-based work in the 90s. I went in people's homes in South Florida, and I would go in for 7 weeks, and if what I didn't work to the satisfaction of the courts and of the child catchers, as I call them, as the old HRS agency, they don't exist anymore in Florida, then the kids would be removed from the home. But I didn't go in one of those families where there wasn't strengths, some strengths. I can remember a family I worked with. I can't disclose confidences, but it was two sisters. They were raising their kids together. There's about 20 kids in the house and about 60 cats, and they didn't clean up after the cats. And so the kids were put in foster care, and they had visitation. They were going to get them back. The day before they were to get them back, they did something to mess it up. And they were saying, I just don't know why I did this. No, I never remember on the phone. They called me, and I said to them, and I really believe it, I said, maybe there was some wisdom you didn't know, because maybe on some level you knew you weren't ready to get these children back yet. And they both cried, and they said, that's exactly it. We know we could never live like they want us to live. And it's not that we feel like they're imposing something on us. It's not good for the kids. We know that we're going to live the way we're going to live, and it's not going to be good for these kids, and it's going to be horrible for these kids. It's going to be worse than it was for us. And so they sabotage themselves in a very loving way, if you can imagine that. Because people do the most amazing things for their kids. I've seen it over and over again in ways. But, it's a strength in families where sometimes we don't see strength. And you can always see strengths in families, but in these godly families, sometimes we see the strengths, but we don't see the other ones. In the family of Abraham, they were godly, focused on the promise. They passed faith across generations. So, Kevin, let me ask you to come back in again. Do you think, and I'm just going to ask you, and this is not like, yeah, do you think, or no, you don't think, but I'm just really curious what you think about it, because I don't know. I vacillate. Do you think that we make a mistake by not highlighting the stuff that we were looking at with the weakness of this family, patterns of deception, favoritism across among children, negative influences with the family? Do you think there's a time that we really ought to give the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say, to families?
And focus on the strengths and the faith that's passed on, perhaps. I was thinking back to the negative things that have happened and my response to those, and the positive things of my family. My grandfather, being a preacher for 60 years, raised me for the first 9 years, and that had a positive effect. My mom teaches, and more of that. Faith passed on. Abraham receiving the covenant promise. What's the biggest statement in the Bible about Abraham? One of the greatest statements of Abraham. He considered his body good as dead, and yet believed God at 99 years old that by 100 they would have their son. And Sarah also had faith. So they had at least one romantic evening, right? We're adults here. And they had one romantic evening expecting God to do what he promised he would do. And for Isaac to grow up as the favored child, you're a blessing from God. You're an answer to prayer. We expected you, just didn't expect it to be this long. But God, look at what God did. I was 100 years old when you were born. And this impacted Isaac, and then Isaac and his children, and he blesses them or Isaac blesses both of the children the best that he can with Esau. And then you remember Jacob blessed all 12 of the sons, even though they had broken his heart. And yet he still had positive things to say and blessings to give to each of them. And they then transferred that message about who God is to their descendants and all. So I heard a story back when I was a kid, and I don't know if it's a apocryphal story or not, but this was a story. There was a man who was a constant alcoholic. He never changed his life. And he had twin boys. And one of the boys grew up and said, "What choice did I have? I had an alcoholic father. All I ever saw was him drinking all the time. Of course I drink." And the other one said, "I grew up in an alcoholic family. I saw my dad drunk, and he was constantly drunk. He never changed, and he was a vicious man. Why do you think I would ever want to do what my dad did?" It's like they both saw, and they both had their reason for drinking and not drinking, and one was a cycle breaker and the other was a cycle continuer. And I'm thinking each of you have had some good things and some bad things in your life.
Exactly. And oftentimes we end up focusing on the weaknesses of the family we grow up in, and feeling really, really bad about that. Or conversely, we look at the strengths and ignore the things that could have been, more helpful. So as I think about this, one of the things that I would like for us to think about is, again, our lived experiences, the families we grew up in, and the couple relationships, or the marriages we have now, or the marriages we hope to have. How can we look at our personal histories, both from the strengths that were passed on to us and the negative patterns, and out of that, in the relationships we have with our marital partners, form something better? And when we look at if we have kids and in marriage, how can we look at what's happening in the family now, both the strengths and the strengths and the weaknesses, and say, how can we do better now? What can we do? What can we learn from this so that things can get better. Because the truth is, the secret is there's no secret. The secret is, as well, is there's no perfect family, no perfect marriage. The secret is that when we talk about happy marriages, we're talking about people that overall are satisfied in the marriages they're in, but they have challenges, they have arguments, they have disagreements, they have things that they're not on the same page with, but somehow they learn to navigate it so that they can be satisfied in some ways. And so this biblical family gives us, I think, a begin to look at it. And again, we look at our families today. Our families have strengths, our families have weaknesses. But then these last thing, I want you to really think about this. Because a lot of times when I talk about this, people say, well, we don't have rules written down, or we don't talk about rules. And that's precisely oftentimes the case. And even if we have rules written down, I'm not talking about the ones we have written down. There's unspoken rules among couples and families that shape behavior. What's considered appropriate, what's considered inappropriate. I grew up, and I won't say the ethnicity, the group, but I grew up in a neighborhood where there was a large immigrant population. A lot of my friends, their parents were either first-generation Americans or they were first-generation Americans, and Grandma from you know where I'm going with this because you grew up in the same town, and Grandma was from the old country, as they called it, and I never will forget, I was a 7 or 8 year old kid, and first time I ate at one of these houses, and I thought I hit the jackpot as a 7 or 8 year old because my friend's mother whispers into my ear, burp, or Grandma's going to be offended. And I thought she was laughing, and then I didn't do it. I thought she was just playing with me. I said, I know better. And then she came back and said, Dale, I wasn't kidding. It's going to hurt my mother-in-law's feelings if you don't burp. I loved eating at their house after that because I could make the biggest belch. But it was kind of an unwritten thing, a cultural thing for them, that you burp after the meal, and it was expected. So I asked my friend one time when we were about 15 or 16, what happens when it's a really bad meal? You know, I said, I've never had a bad meal. Your grandma, your mom never cooked a bad meal, but surely it happens. What happens? And he says, you better burp. You better burp. But that's kind of an unspoken rule. And I said, well, what would happen if somebody didn't burp? He says, I don't know, but it would be bad. I was speaking to the unspoken in some ways. But we have those things, and we talk about not being respected sometimes in our families. A couple gets married, and they talk about respect. And I always find that interesting with newlyweds because oftentimes it's about doing things different than our partners did in the families they grew up in. So, and oftentimes they're little things. In our family, the toilet paper roll always comes from the bottom. No, in our family, it always comes from the top. Why are you not respecting me by doing the toilet paper right? In some families, you don't wait for people to eat, before you sit down to the meal if they don't come home because it's just understood, well, it would be rude to keep people waiting because you're late at work or have another obligation. So you wouldn't want to think about keeping people waiting. In other families that they marry somebody like that, marry somebody who's like, you don't think about eating until everybody's there. Just examples. One of my favorite examples is a personal example. I was living in Kuhn, Idaho. I was a young man, 23, 24 years old. I'm eating at this family for dinner. They had me for dinner, and the phone rings. And I get uncomfortable because the phone keeps ringing through dinner. And I said, is somebody going to get this? And the husband says, we don't answer the phone during dinner. If it's important, they'll call back. This is our time. Now, that was bizarre to me. And then now it's not bizarre because it makes perfect sense. And that was before answering machines, all that. It was a long time ago, before answering machines or ways to do it. If you didn't get the call, you didn't get the call unless they called back. But I left there and thought, man, that's weird. And then probably about 48 hours later, I thought, that's brilliant. Why have I stubbed my toe sometime running for a phone only to be talking to somebody who's trying to sell me something while I'm doing this? You know, or why have I stubbed my toe running for the phone only to find out that it was something inane? I never stubbed my toe running for a phone again after that, you know, and you know, it's kind of an example. It's not relevant now because we have, you know, ways of connecting, but back then it was. But to me, it was revolutionary. That was a small thing. I don't have to answer the phone. And I wonder how many of us in the marriages we're in, we got something from our families that wasn't true. I'll tell you something that my wife doesn't like me to tell, but I tell it, and I tell it to her in the audience, and she says, I really wish you wouldn't tell it, but I do anyway. That when we were first married, it bothered me. We lived in the town that she grew up in when we first married. Then we moved to Florida a few months later. But her mother and her siblings wouldn't knock on the door. They would just come in. They all did that. And I thought that was bad. And I said to my mother-in-law, I said, you might just find me coming out of the shower naked. And she says, well, you're going to have to change your habits. And I said, nope, this is my house. And you can fill in the rest of the blank. Something happened where she never did that. The rest of her life, whenever she came to my door, she rang the doorbell or knocked on the door. You can figure out what happened. And I never felt bad about it because it was my house. And, you know, if you walk in somebody's house, in my mind, without unannounced, you see what you see. She called me a nudist. That's my life. And I wasn't. But anyway, those are the things that, you know, these unspoken rules. So I think a lot of times in our marriages, we don't think about those rules. Where do these clashes come from that seem silly? A lot of them come from the families we grew up in, what was appropriate and not appropriate. Sometimes they come from, well, I don't want to live like my family lived. I don't want to do this, so I'm desperate to do it differently. And our partners want to do it in the way that our families did we didn't want. Sometimes we come into second marriages like that. It's helped me in divorces, working with divorces, but I learned it in Fort Lauderdale because when I was doing my work down there were a lot of people that were in second marriages because their first spouse had died, and they'd have stories about how much they loved and how great that marriage was for 40 years, and I waited for the but. But I didn't like this thing, and I wasn't going to have it in my next marriage if I had another next marriage. So they get married again, and they marry somebody who oftentimes says, I love my spouse. We were married for 45 years. Great marriage, but there was something that was missing, and I wanted it. And the thing that they wanted was the thing this person doesn't want. Just that kind of thing happens, you know, it's so often. And I saw that type of thing happen a lot. And so these unspoken rules have a great impact. And then, again, generational patterns persist.
Something comes to mind whenever you said that. You know, my sister-in-law and her husband, David and Pam, Jan's sister, they'd been married for 10 years. And this is minor, but it's an example of what we're talking about. One day, she broiled the hot dogs. And he said, I love it. I love broiled hot dogs. And she said, oh, I thought you liked them boiled. That's why I've always boiled them. Because I thought you liked them boiled like my family did as we grew up. So I've always boiled, but I prefer broiled. And they never discussed it. 10 years. And he said, that's a minor thing, but how many things are minor that can actually become huge?
Yeah.
It's like Jan thought when she started sweeping around the floor, because she was a homemaker and I was outside working and I provided this and she did the domestic things at home. That's what she wanted to do. We agreed on that. And one of the things was she would sweep the floor. And finally she said, will you ever pull these chairs out for me? And it didn't, I never thought about it because I thought she's going to sweep the floor. She'll pull them out, she'll put them back, and that's part of sweeping. Her dad had always, when her mom would sweep, he would always pull the chairs out and then put them back. And she expected that I would do that just by the fact that she grew up watching that. And when I didn't, it caused some conflict. And that was one irritation that added to about maybe 100 more that I didn't quite do what she expected me to do, because she grew up in a family where her dad just naturally did those things. And those little things go together, top of the roll, bottom of the roll. You squeeze the toothpaste here. I want to squeeze them in the middle, but you squeeze them at the end. And there's an answer to that. Get your own toothpaste. It's an easy answer. But okay, you get the principle, but the point is communication about those things that you grew up in the family and you had these expectations, and they're unstated, unspoken rules. They're unspoken expectations. In the communication field, we call it expectation violation. Mm-hmm. I expect it this way, but you violated it. Now, maybe the violation is good. I expected you'd come home and you just be kind of grumpy, and I came home with some flowers. That was a violation of an expectation, but it was a positive one.
Yeah.
But how do you find out what those expectations are if you don't actually communicate the family you grew up in? There's a great picture I remember. I think it's Burkina and Faulkner in their seminars that did what we're doing. But the husband and wife are standing in front of each other, and they're getting ready to be married. They're not quite husband and wife yet. They're in the wedding. And behind her, there's a stack of luggage. And behind him, there's a stack of luggage. And the caption was, "We all bring baggage into our relationship."
Yeah, I remember
and
that.
A point they made was, and I held on to this, you don't marry a person, you marry a family.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what came to mind when you were asking those questions. I'm thinking, so the positives and negatives, how do you go about learning those things from each other? And I bet there's still stuff that you have not learned about your spouse and the family that he or she grew up in.
Yeah, even after 50 years, because I worked with those retired, those older couples, sometimes 50 years, been married in Fort Lauderdale, and that was very much the case for a lot of them.
You don't know everything about Norma yet at 37 years, do you?
No, sure don't. I learn stuff all the time. She learns stuff about me as well. So what can we do about all of this? I mean, we're looking at this. I think we want to decide our family focus in some ways. And, if I can put a pitch in for godliness, I always put a pitch in for godliness. I mean, you see, in spite of everything, through the generations, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, there was this focus on godliness. I mean, talked about Kevin's kids. I mean, at least the third generation where there's a focus on godliness. Now, the ones of his kids that have kids, I'm sure they're doing the same thing. So, there's this focus on godliness. I'd like to say that's happening, with my family and my kids as well. It's a intergenerational focus on godliness. But, you can do that. You really want to take, I think, your values seriously, who you are. Because we think about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, and at first blush, if I'm just telling you this negative stuff, if you're someone that doesn't know the Bible, I think everybody here knows the Bible, but if you don't know the Bible, one of the things you might say is, this family was awful. What happened in the next generation? Well, they took their values seriously. They're good values. These values of faithfulness, these values looking to God. I mean, Abraham, trusting God to the point that he was going to sacrifice his son, I think God, knowing God would come through. He's the same guy that, did his thing with the handmaiden because he didn't understand the problem. He didn't understand. And he's the same guy that lied to Abimelech, but in the big picture, the values were taken seriously. And I think when we know our family values, what we truly value, what's truly important to us, what we're truly trying to accomplish in our family, that in the end, really good things can happen in spite of those things in our families that look a lot like what happened with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Not the exact same things, but Do you know any family that's gone 4 generations without major issues in each generation? I don't know of one. Do you? There's always something that happens. So we want to take our values seriously. And I really, really believe this. In 2026, it needs to be said more than it's said. Prioritize family time. I don't believe family time is me sitting here playing on my phone while my wife's playing on her phone and the kids are each playing on their phone. There's time for that. I'm not trying to, poo-poo what's happening, but is there time when we're really connecting, where we're really talking, where we're really doing something together? I could give you prescriptive things, but I'd rather not do that. Within your family, what are the ways that you can have family time that's meaningful to people? And I think it blows up a lot of times because somebody says family time is going to look like this, and we try to impose it, and it doesn't work. My wife tells, she was raised Catholic, and she tells, that her dad, the big thing was for them to pray the rosary at a certain time every day, and if the phone would ring, Dad would say, "Don't get it." Just like this other family, this is what I learned. I didn't know my wife when I learned the early lesson, but she said that he would say, "Don't get the phone, it's the devil trying to interfere," and the kids would all laugh, and then he would get mad, etc. But they would get through it. But it wasn't really a meaningful family time except for the joking about it. So what do we do that's meaningful for the family? And I think when we listen with an ear and observe with our eye where people in the family are connecting, we can find it. I see people all the time writing these books, 10 things to do. You do these 10 things, your family's going to be better. I'm like, oh yeah, every family's different. I say prioritize family time. I'm not going to give you a prescription for that because it wouldn't work in your family. You live in your family. You live in your couple relationship. Figure it out there. Be flexible, but yet consistent. I think those are things we can do. I don't know if I really want to say a whole lot about this tonight, but I think it's important. We have the family life cycle that we have. I'll start with a kid leaves home and becomes independent. Then that kid often gets married. That couple that then has children. Then those children grow, and then they launch, and then there's retirement. What happens across that family life cycle? And oftentimes there's kids and people at different places in it. We're launching sometime a child when we have another child that's just coming into adolescence, or we have a child coming into adolescence, we're ready to launch one, and then an older child returns home with kids. These things happen along the way, but I think it's just so incredibly important to kind of think about what's happening, because this is the story of many of us. We leave home, we become independent, we get into marriage, we raise kids, we launch kids, and then we retire, and then we die. I don't want to be crude about it, then we die. So what's the plan for nurturing relationships? What's the plan for having a couple relationship that's meaningful and helpful across that span? What's the plan for helping children to launch well? What's the plan for helping them then to raise godly kids? What's the plan for having a meaningful retirement? All of that is important. So this stuff here I'm going to probably get into tomorrow, so I'm not going to continue on that the rest of this evening. But Kevin, I know you have some stuff as well, but before you get into your stuff, is there anything that you want to say about anything we've looked at, anything you think that needs to be added, or any applications you'd like to make, or even taken in different directions, because we all have different perspectives. Maybe you have some very different perspectives on some of this that you would like to add, because I think it's sometimes good to get a different perspective.
I think it might be good for just a moment to open this up for some questions. You may have heard Dale talk for now a little over an hour, and
I'm
say,
good at that.
yeah, and to say, okay, here's my situation, and here's what I'm wondering about. Or you said no prescription, but yet there's some examples you might offer that would generate thought to, well, have you thought about or thought about and thought about? Maybe not that, but a combination of these. So there may be some questions that you
Yeah.
have that you want to drill him on, because there's some things we talk about in generalities and say, you need to work out creatively, but as far as having some ideas of how to even begin that discussion along those lines. And so first of all, has this been a helpful session? Have you found some things here that maybe has been helpful to you, has been beneficial at all? So some of you have been writing down notes, and here or there you've been drawing pictures, and that's pretty cool too. Because sometimes while you're doodling, your mind is still picking up a lot of great information, and then others of you are just plain exhausted. And I get it. It's Friday evening. You've taken some time, and you're here investing some time here. The question is, has it been beneficial at this point?
If it's not,
And if
stay
it's not,
tuned.
tell him so.
Stay tuned.
Ray? Wish we had our microphone down so people online can hear. Are you going to get
I'll
Tyler?
repeat it.
Okay.
I'll repeat
He's
it.
going to get a micro, but we'll repeat what you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here's big
But
voice.
it's online, and we want to be able to hear
Okay.
those people as well. So we'll repeat what you're saying, Ray. Go ahead. Or summarize it. Yes.
There comes the microphone. Yeah. One slide? Okay.
Bump up the volume. There you go.
There you go.
So, those bullets that you see there, one slide please.
One slide back.
Slide forward. Nope, forward. I'm sorry. I said backward.
Well, I'm going the wrong way. That's me. Is this the slide, or do you want me to go no slide?
Next slide. That slide, those four things, write them down. Next slide. Every time you enter your next phase, you should be having the same conversation about you and your spouse and your life together. If you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there it is. It's Rick Lewis' hierarchy of marriage.
Yeah.
You'll go to the top, you'll fall off again. If you don't renegotiate, you'll find yourself in uncharted territory. And so we have had these discussions many, and it was helpful each time to set a baseline expectation of behaviors and household management and other aspects of our life. And it made it easier to identify when we found the unnegotiated, which is how I would describe it. Like, oh, we didn't talk about that one, and yet here we are. So it's important that you do that. If you don't communicate, I don't even know why you or how you
Yeah.
got married.
Good points. Good points. And there's a guy named Salvador Minuchin that's kind of a prominent figure in my field. And, people will read something, just a soundbite from where he said he and his wife were married 3 times. And they'll ask me, well, what happened that they got married and divorced that many times? And and I say, read on, because that wasn't what he was saying. He was saying it was one marriage, but it's the stuff you're talking about. As they went through different transitions, their relationship changed, and they purposely changed it. So, he and his wife talked about, we were married 3 times, but it was one marriage, but they renegotiated things. And it's really interesting because there's a lot of research that suggests, and my observation kind of, makes say, yeah, I didn't need to read the research to know this, that people oftentimes develop problems when they're navigating one of these changes. I mean, you got a campus full of kids every fall, freshmen that come here, and they don't navigate independence very well. When I taught in PhD program at Amherst University, you would see these people coming in, had straight A's in their master's program, and straight A's in their or mostly A's and B's in their junior and senior year of college, and the first year D's and F's, and they're like, are you going to hold this against me? Or not going to? Are we going to get in? And we said no. We always said no. We see that you grew up, but navigating those first 2 years on your own can be difficult. Sometimes people make mistakes that they, don't ever recover from during those first couple years. And same way with marriage, same with parenting, same way when kids leave home and all the kids leave home. It's awful. A lot of those older families I worked with years ago in Fort Lauderdale, couples, the last kid had left home, and the kids have been distractions away from them, and it was awful. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. You have to talk about these things along these transitions. Really, really good point. Thank you. Ray, is it? Yeah, thank you, Ray. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I was just going to say, I really liked how you mentioned looking at not just the positive things that Jacob, Abraham, all of them did, but looking at those. I think there's a reason those are included in the Bible, is so you can learn from their mistakes. And I think applying that to our marriages, it's important to always be, willing to examine your own mistakes, learn from your own mistakes, but then being willing to share those with your spouse, your partner, your marriage partner. I like that term, marriage partner.
Yeah.
And then even other married couples, as you're offering advice or counseling, and that we learn through failure. And so you have to admit your failures to learn. If you're not admitting your failures, you can't learn through failure, and you're doomed to fail again.
Absolutely.
Or
And I
let me,
think that's
let me
great.
capitalize on that. How does God use the failure to even accomplish his purpose? Okay, so there's an Ishmael, and then there's much later, a Joseph. And the brothers are going to kill Joseph, except one convinces them, let's not kill him, let's sell him. Who did they sell him to? The Ishmaelites, the descendants of Uncle Ishmael. And the Ishmaelites then took him in and sold him again. And God used that to bring him to the second power in Egypt. David doesn't interact with war. He didn't go to war. But he's up on the rooftop, and I'm not thinking it's by mistake. And I don't think her name is Bathsheba by mistake. She's at a bath. And so Bathsheba is taking a bath, and he observes, as I think he expected to observe, and he calls her over, and they commit adultery, and he tries to cover it over whenever she is impregnated, and then has her husband killed. And the baby dies. And the next son is Solomon, the great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of Jesus. So God takes our worst times and uses that sometimes in such a way as to, wow, how did you do that, God? I mean, how many skeletons do I have in my closet? You'll never know until eternity.
Let me
Now,
say.
no, stop. Definition of a best friend. You guys have equal amount of dirt on each other, but
That's why I won't tell any of his skeletons.
But the question is, I know the skeletons in Dolls, many, if not almost all, the skeletons. He knows many, if not all, the skeletons in my closet. But the amazing thing is how God has used even those things to shape and mold and open door. It's weird what God has done in our lives when we were just outright stupid.
Yeah.
Now, I wish when I was in college, I attended a marriage and family seminar where somebody said, plan. Look at the different seasons of life and think ahead. Because if you think ahead, plan ahead, prepare ahead, pray ahead, you're more likely to handle it better than, I don't know what will happen if my husband were to die. I just fall apart. I just fall apart. Well, what are they going to do when the husband dies? They've already programmed themselves what to do, haven't they?
Yeah.
They're going to fall apart. So if you think ahead and plan ahead and think and pray ahead, I think you're going to handle things a bit differently. And especially if you do that together.
Absolutely.
And open it up and be creative and flexible, as Dale said. And I wish I had this kind of a thing. And we know somebody personally who said, I believe if we had this before we had a divorce, Paul and I would not have divorced.
Yeah, I remember that. So let's hear the stuff. You had some stuff, too. I'd love to hear some of the things that you had for this evening.
Well, I found one of the interesting words that Dale had back on the slide, and it was family values? You know what your family values are? Anybody can you identify some of the family value or values that you personally hold as being these are important things? Decide what your family focus is, and where is it about family? That we take values seriously. There's another way of looking at the word value, and I personally believe that that is how you express love, is your value. I value you. When I say I love you, Carla, I love you. I like your reaction to that. When I say I love you, what have I said? What have I really said when I told her I love you? And by the way, that's not just an example. I really do love you. And I'm glad you're my sister, and I'm glad I know you. You've made a difference in my life. So I say I love you. What have I just said by those words? She matters. Great. Another word. I value the relationship. How about I value her? She matters. I value her. It's another way of saying that. How about the words, I care? If something happens to you, I feel it. There's a connection there. What does that do for you when you know somebody appreciates you, values you? We talked about the favored child and the unfavored. Where were you in that dynamic in your own family? Did you always look at your sibling and say, they always get the break. I never get a break. My girls, who are older than my son, who's the baby of the family, have always said that David got away with things that they never did. And they're probably right, because the first two were experiments, and we pretty well figured it out by Dave. So, you have that feeling that you grow up with, and each of them thought the others were more valued, which I think means that we balance that fairly well. I don't know, but how did you feel growing up as far as your position? Firstborn, middle, last? Were you one of six? Did you even pay attention? Were you at home? Were you more the latchkey child? You came home and nobody was there, or you didn't have a home? Or I know some of you have a different story, right? Everybody in here has a different family story. Where were you in the favored or unfavored list? And some of you already know your story. You grew up feeling totally unfavored. I mean, some of you were beaten. One of the guys I lived with in college grew up with his dad coming home. And you know what I'm talking about, but his dad would come home drunk and would beat his mother while he and his sister cowered under the table and watched it happen and couldn't do anything about it as young children. How'd that affect him? How did that affect his psyche to grow up in that kind of an abuse in his home? Now, some of you have experienced something like that, or you were the one that was beaten. What has that done? And I'm suggesting to you that when love is expressed, it frees someone. When you're genuinely loved and accepted for who you are, doesn't it give you a feeling of freedom? So I'm working with maybe a couple, and we're talking. I am not a counselor. I'm not a therapist, but I do work in relationships and communication. I can do that, and I can coach some. But when it gets over my head, then I'm quickly, no, you need to go see somebody who can handle this better. But I can give some coaching and training, I think. And in that setting, when a couple comes, maybe a premarital couple, and they're talking about they want to get married, and we go through an assessment tool and see where their strengths and weaknesses are and where they are in life, and we talk about Jesus, and we talk about values in their home. And I ask, why do you want to marry him? What is it you love about him? Is there any difficulty that she has? What are 5 things you really appreciate about him? Can she give them? How fast? How about him? What are 5 things you really love about her? Can you give them quickly? And you guys are looking at me like, what? Would you agree? That's an easy thing to do. I mean, if I were to sit here now and say, David, what are 5 things you really appreciate about Sarah? You'd say, well, Yeah, I don't know. I know better than that. So you say this, and you be able to do it quickly. I say, Dave, what are 5 things you really like about you? What are you bringing to the table? What are some things from your family that are strengths that you're bringing into this family that you're forming? What are things you love, really love about you as a person? And I've watched deer in the headlights look. Because most cannot give. They might give 1 or 2, but then by 3 and 4 and 5, and if I ask them for 10, not going to happen. If you don't know what you're bringing into the relationship, then what are you coming into the relationship expecting? Help me out here. Here's Joe and here's Mary, and they're going to get married, and they're both coming in with what they love about each other, but they don't recognize what they're actually bringing into the relationship that's positive. What are they looking for? Where's the mic? What are they looking for, Ray? Come on. Well, you got to raise your hand, then Tyler's going to come to you. You got to signal him, all right?
Do better in this marriage of me and you.
Yeah.
So I'll start, just so everybody can break the log jam. So when Denise and I got married, I asked Denise to do 3 things. One was never hit me. One was say, I love you every time I leave the house. And 2 was that we sit down and eat together every day. Because I didn't have any of the second 2 and only the first in my life when I was young. And so she knew part of that. We semi grew up together, ran around in the same circles. I don't know if there was a cohesive, comprehensive marriage in our entire neighborhood. Nobody lasted. Nobody's parents stayed together to this day. And so what we decided concurrently, and I won't speak with her, but this was one we both decided upon, was that we were going to make this work. No matter how broken either one of us were, that it was forever and for life. And so we were going to fulfill the last part of our vows. And so I don't know where your past is. I don't know what you guys, did any of you talk? I mean, you old people right there, we didn't talk when they got married. Communication hadn't been invented.
It's funny, the middle table's the oldest.
I think I can say I walked into marriage just expecting I have a husband who's going to provide for me. We're going to be together. We'll have children. We'll raise children. We'll have a family. Ironically enough, both of us had some of the same expectations that were kind of unstated. You know, you're going out of the house to work. I'm going to do everything else in the house. And that's okay up to a point. And my husband did promise my father that since he took me out of college, that he would see that I finished. So he did allow me to finish my education, as he said. I called him one time, he was overseas, and I said, well, I'm graduating from K-State. It's my 4th college to go to over 12 years. And he said, well, you did it in spite of me. And I said, I sure did. But for the most part, we brought commitment and a value that our relationship should be based on Christian principles.
Sure.
So everything else we eventually evolved as situations changed.
Okay. Fred?
I've been accused of not talking loud enough from the pulpit either.
No.
I think Bonnie and I had, many, many long discussions before one day I told her that I'd bought a house trailer, and she says, what does that mean? I said, what do you think it means? So that was my proposal. But I think we came to some conclusions that we both brought honesty, dependability, the determination that marriage would last a lifetime,
You
and
do, got all three, yes.
and those kinds of similar expectations of what we could expect from each other weren't,
Right.
I'll make lots of money for you, or we'll live in a big house.
Yeah,
Those were never discussed. We fortunately came from fairly similar socioeconomic backgrounds, but she came from a much more stable family than I came from, and so we both recognized that. She was pretty knowledgeable about the things that my baggage, and I didn't think she had any baggage, but
but she did. What did he find out? Yeah, now you get the
Yeah,
mic. It's
yeah.
like point, counterpoint.
Well-
Tell us the truth.
I just want to add a little bit. I remember, in fact, I made note, sitting in the car one night, we had been on a date or something, but we were serious, and we had talked, and a couple of things. He was not a baptized believer at the time that we were dating, and at the time that I said I would marry him. And so there were some things that I was adamant about, and one was that if we had children, they would go to church. I couldn't force him to go to church with me. And before we married, he had been going. I'm not done.
Okay. Yeah.
But they would go to church with me. I wanted him to go. He would have to make that decision. And before we married, I had gone away to work for a while, and he was going. So that kind of took care of itself. But there were a few things like that the children were going to be raised in the church.
Okay,
And
sure.
and he agreed. I mean, he didn't.
before we married, I actually promised her that I would always attend with her.
Okay,
That was another thing that
that's
But
good.
that was voluntary on your part. I didn't
Okay,
ask
so
you
we're
for
we're
that.
going to down a bit of a different path than what I expected, but I love what's happening here. Because this, 58
Wow.
years, that's something. All right, that is good, yeah. And you've got them beat by 8 years, and that's good, only because you're alive longer. Here's what you've said is so important from what we talked about, the expectations, what Dale had brought up and we've emphasized tonight. But what I was getting to is this, that when here's Joe and here's Mary, and they're going to get married. And Joe is only looking at what Mary is going to do for him. And Mary's only looking at what Joe is going to do for her. And if they're entering into this relationship like two dry sponges, and you put two dry sponges into a dry bucket, and tell me how much moisture they're going to have. See, Joe, if Joe were to take some time and say, okay, I recognize my weaknesses, but here are some strengths. Here's some things that I'm bringing to this relationship. I'm fun to be with. I'm a good listener. I have a good sense of humor. When I set a goal, I'm determined and I'm going to achieve these goals. So I'm pushing towards success, and I always want to grow. These are things I like about me. And if I were somebody else and I met me for the first time, I'd want to be my friend because I offer these things. And if Joe realizes what he has to offer, and Mary says, well, I'm a good listener, and I'm also fun to be with, and I love this kind of games, and I think I'm humorous, and I care about people. I mean, I really care, and I'll do anything for other people because I genuinely want them to be better. I want others to succeed, and I'll help serve. And I want to be in the background. And he said, well, I want to be in the front. So there's something that they don't share in common, but they recognize the strengths. Now they have a full sponge, and they can squeeze out into the bucket, and then both of them get in the bucket. And guess what? They both can fill up, right? But if you don't know what you have to offer, then what are you coming into the relationship for? Except to make up for what you lack. And by the way, that draws us to each other, doesn't it? Often. That's why it seems like opposites truly do attract. Because here I am, an extreme extrovert, and the woman I married was an extreme introvert. And she saw balance, and she was extremely detailed. I mean, type A personality. And I'm somewhat type Z. If I'm even an alphabet letter, I'm just, and so there was complementary, and we were attracted to each other because of that. But I'm suggesting, especially in a premarital session, I'll ask them, what are 5 things you truly, and I'd like you to do this. I'd like you to write down 5 things you truly like about you as a person. That you genuinely appreciate, that if you were someone else, you would choose to be your friend. And if you have difficulty with that question, then you need to take a serious inward look, because you do have strengths. You've got something to offer. And if you run short on your own, then you can ask your spouse or somebody, your closest friend. Your closest friend. What are some things that you like about me? Is there anything wrong with asking that question? I would think not. By the way, what are some things you think I need to work on? And be ready. Mm-hmm. Somebody who's going to be honest with you. But see, if I value, so Dale and I have been, like I said, we've been friends for over 50-some years. And there have been times where he has confronted me with something that I need to grow on. Something I need to change. And that wound of a friend makes him closer than a brother. I want people to be honest with me. If there's some criticism, something you see that I need to change in, please confront me. So this friendship allows there to be a safety for him to say, have you ever thought about this? Have you considered how you come across when you do this or you say this or whatever? And I have that same function with him. I mean, it's just part of our friendship. But spouses should be able to do, but how do you do that? How do you create that safety? Again, the key word, I think, is value. Now, how you express that value and how you agree that this is going to be, one of the things that we found helpful, Jan and I did before we married, was we made a list of our love language. And it was before the book, Love Languages, came out. You know the book, Love Languages, and each of us have 5 different languages that is argued, and it's a fairly helpful tool. But the illustration was given this way. A man he was German, and he walked into a shop, and he noticed that the woman who was operating behind the cash register, she's very attractive, and he wanted to get to know her, and in fact, he thought he might like to ask her out on a date. So he walked up to the counter and began talking with her in German, and she only knew French. And they did not know any word in each other's language. How much of a relationship can they have? And then the author of that suggested that each person has a specific kind of love language, not words and service and encouragement. Those are valid, but what says I love you to you? And we each wrote about 15 to 20, well, actually we wrote 30 things, very specific things about when you do this, that says I love you to me. And one of the things she said was, when you spontaneously bring me a Snickers bar. If I knew that I had done something offensive or something that she was angry about, guess what I came home with?
Snickers bar.
As a peace offering. You say, well, doesn't that take the spontaneity out of it? I mean, if she told you that says I love you, where's that coming out of your heart? No. I was not shooting in the dark. When I came home with a single rose, or when I pulled out the chairs from under the table, or whenever I did specific things that she said, because this was a list that we each creatively, nobody told us to do that. I mean, nobody gave us the list out of a book. They said, here's a suggestion. Take this. This is your love language. And somewhere I still have that pact. Jan's 30 things that she said, if you do this, you, and I grew up in a touching family. I mean, I said, if you initiate a hug, that says I love you. She grew up in a family that hardly touched each other except when they, would leave for long periods of time from each other. So that was not her first choice of showing love. But when she heard or she knew that was how it expressed love to me, she said, I'll do that. Come here, let me rub your shoulders. When she initiated that, first of all, I liked that because I love to have my shoulders rubbed. But second, when she initiated it, that said specifically, I love you. Does that make sense? So when you come up with that yourselves with each other, and that kind of thing will help you to express value and commitment. Now, you three that took the microphone, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, you 4 who took the mic, 5, the things that you communicated, the biggest word that came out for me was commitment. We're married for life. Deciding that up front, divorce is not an option. The D word is not there. The final D word is, when one of us dies, then we're done. Then the marriage is over, when one of us or both of us die. But until then, it's not until death do us parts, till death do us parts. So it's that commitment, and love, real love, is expressed in value and commitment. So what is it that expresses value to you? And what are you doing to express value to the other in a language that she understands and feels appreciated? A lot of people stay in a job that they're not paid much, but they're appreciated. And they'll stay a long time when appreciation is expressed and they feel valuable. So I want to pause a moment and see if there's something within what I've said that fits within what you were talking about. And I know I'm approaching it from a bit of a different perspective, but I think the terms value, you talk about how do you grow in love? You grow in love by expressing appreciation, value, gratitude. John Gottman, great psychologist, what did you say, a psychologist, he's not a marriage therapist, is he?
He's a psychologist.
He's a psychologist. Anyway, he and his wife have run a love lab now for about 40-some years, and he's come to this conclusion that for every single, and I heard that's a new number. Did you tell me that, Maria? There's a new number on that. Is for every negative, there needs to be at least 20 positives.
Yeah.
And those 20 positives are not just words. When you look at somebody with soft eyes and a smile, that's a positive. Really. When I'm looking back and I'm wondering, what's Ray thinking about this? And I look back, and just as we're making eye contact, he goes, and I think, that's good. And I don't know what he's thinking, but the smile says that to me. And when someone looks at you with soft eyes and a smile compared to a frown and a grouch, you get what I'm saying? The 20 positives aren't just words. It might be, man, good to see you. All right, that touch does something. There's something positive there. So how do you do that in your home? How do you do that with your kids? To let your kids, how many of you grew up in a home thinking your parents were always critical of you? Always riding your back. Always telling you what you needed to change. And would you ever grow up? I don't know how many times I heard that. Would you grow up? I want to go, yes, I am. I'm there. And I wanted to grow up. I wanted to be mature. And I wanted to smoke when I was young because I know that a lot of people smoked at the time. And I wanted to smoke.
It's like those candy cigarettes I used to have.
I
back
used to
then.
play with, yes.
Me
I
too.
loved it. And you could blow out the smoke. Yeah, and I don't think you can buy those anymore. Maybe you can. But I used to want to, and I would tell I want to smoke. And they'd say, you're not old enough. You're not old enough.
Yes.
Got to trace you back. But you're not old enough to smoke. What did that make it for me? You're not old enough to drink. What did that make it for me? I wanted to grow older. I wanted to mature so I could smoke. I wanted to mature so I could drink. What a stupid thing to say to your kid. And I really mean that. My grandparents and parents would say, and another thing they said, I'm going to come back to you, but it was hilarious. They'd say, Bud, this is my grandfather, Bub, don't you ever let me catch you doing that again. Now, I know what he meant now. But then that was a challenge. Don't you ever let me catch you. I was determined. They were not going to catch me. Yeah. Trace,
Yeah, I don't know if I can articulate what.
is that on?
My head's kind of spinning with lots of things. About year 5 for Troy and I, divorce wasn't an option to him. He committed that it was forever. Of course, I committed that it was forever, but we had hit a place where I was ready to divorce. So thankfully, we worked through that here 2 years later. But I was kind of going off what Ray said and how Ray put it, that each season that you enter, so that independence, marriage, parenting, launching children, retirement, you almost have to go back to this list and decide, okay, what's your family focus in this season? What's your, what values have changed? How do you prioritize family time as a young married couple, now as parenting? How do you prioritize family time in retirement years, because it's the two of you now, how are you going to do this together?
Yeah.
And a thought that entered my mind too was that through all of those seasons, you're not the same person when you come out the other end. Hopefully you've grown and you've changed together over the years. I think one of the struggles when I look back to when we had the challenges, and I wanted out, we had grown apart, that kind of thing, is we weren't, for one, spending time together, because he was working 2 jobs, trying to provide for the family, trying to allow me to stay home. It was a struggle being, young parents and that kind of thing. But I think for me and maybe it's a woman thing, I don't know, but is like wearing the different hats, the wife hat, the mom hat, the career hat, the trying to juggle all those different things. I think you can get lost in that and your identity a little bit, and realizing that the most important thing is the wife, that the two of you stay one, and we lost that. We lost that we were a partnership, as you say, and to work through this together versus me taking control of some things. And so I don't know. I don't know what to do with that, but I wanted to share just the understanding of what Ray was getting at, is trying to re-look at these through each season. They change, and to revisit them and figure out your priorities and who you are and how have we changed and how have we grown together, because now we're different because of things we've done and grown together in. I don't know if that all makes sense.
It does.
But yeah, so there was a struggle there where we weren't spending time together, and we lost who we were with each other, because he was job focused and I was kid focused, I think. And so we lost the connection with one another, and that's, I don't know.
Yeah, all that does make sense. And I think one of the things that I see couples react to life. Things happen, and then they react. And I see couples, let's talk about this. We're entering a new stage, and they'll talk it through. And it's the choice that you make. Are you going to communicate with each other openly, or you're not going to communicate with each openly? You're going to be flexible and vulnerable. I want to do this, and I want to travel there. Well, I don't want to travel. I want to be home. You need to work on those negotiation things together. But if you don't plan it together, then you're just going to be reactionary in those cases. And it's not that those turn out terrible, because sometimes it turns out okay. But what difference would it make if you really openly, in a vulnerable way, communicate with each other ahead of time? And work with, maybe you need a third party to step in and listen and say, well, here's a couple things you might want to talk about to figure how you're going to work on this. And here's some ideas that might get you started. But Fred.
I just wanted to dovetail on what Tracy was saying, because in case we left the impression that we've had 58 years of marital bliss, which never saw a bumpy road, I think going back to the determination that we were going to be married for life got us past some times when one or the other was ready to give it up. And I think that's really, really important, because we found that after we were in a position where we would actually talk about some things that were bothering us or bothering one of us and deal with it, then we found that that could be fixed.
Absolutely.
And we did get some help.
It can be,
And well, and as Bonnie says, and along the way we got some help too.
sure. And it's one of the best things that we did was seek out a marriage and family therapist who actually helped us walk through some things. And some of you know some of that story, but the first thing that Fred told me when we got together, and he told me, we were 10 minutes in our conversation, and he said, Kevin, I've got to tell you, you're a terrible listener. I taught listening for a lot of my living was teaching listening. I trained people to listen, and I reacted to that. And he said, "You don't listen well, like now." And then he took us through some exercises for the next 3 times we met with him, and he helped me learn better how to listen. And I can't say it fixed, but it made things better. I'm not sure a whole lot was fixed. And I will say this, and you'll hear me say it again. Some of you heard me say it now. In June, Jan will have been gone 10 years. Our worst times were better than no times. And I'm just telling you, decide to stay together, and you're going to work it out together, and regardless. And the key words, we're going to get in this probably Sunday morning in class, but it's the one another sections of Scripture. But we're willing to forbear with one another and forgive one another. And, the forbear is a put up with.
Yeah.
It's like there's some things that she just said, I can't change him. It's not my job. I can only change me. And I'm only responsible for me.
That's 3 stories in a row, counting yours, of resilience, starting with Tracy, then your all story, then your story with your late wife. I mean, I think people oftentimes think, well, things are not going well now, so there's no choice but to leave. But, these stories of resilience just amaze me. My good friend Virginia Todd Holman, she calls herself Toddy Holman, has written 2 books on this where she studied couples that were resilient. That's her area is resilience in marriage. And I love reading her stuff because, there's these really rich stories of people getting past those bad patches to be resilient. And sometimes when in the middle of it's like, is it ever going to get better? It's going to change. But it can. We, hear 3 stories here of bad patches only for things to get better. And I think that's something we forget.
Well, the words you just said, it will get better, is often where people, I think, fail to, we're going to make this better.
Yeah.
And to taking that responsibility, then better, it will get better.
And it will.
And it will, because you're both focused on making that happen. And we're just about ready to wrap this up. And Denise, let's hear what you have to say or ask.
Ray and I remember things very differently. He tells stories, and I'm like, but we went through our difficult time as well.
Bring it up.
And as you said, a lot of times you hit those difficult moments, and it's like, well, where do we go from here? And the whole complimenting thing, Ray's very purposeful. I'm more of I'm just going to go with the flow and see how it all comes out in the end. My point being that you have to, we got to a point too where things were not good. We had no idea where things were going to go. I probably would have just coasted along unhappily forever, maybe, I don't know. But Ray is not that person. And we sat at the table staring at one another with the whole, I dare you, just say it. Say you want to divorce me. And he didn't. And my point is pride. We let our pride get in the way. And Ray just looked at me and he said, I don't want to get a divorce. And I didn't either. And the next day, everything was better, just because we had acknowledged That's not the road we do want to go down. And I can't tell you how we got there. And I can't tell you how it changed beyond, it was like the next day was just different. He said he didn't want to divorce me. I said, I don't want to divorce you. And it was just different. So you've got to be very careful about pride, is my point. Because a lot of us are, like I said, I was just looking at him like, say it.
Yeah.
Just say it. you know, and if you let your pride get in the way.
Pride will destroy you. And in fact, God opposes the proud, right? We just read that Wednesday night. God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble and raises, exalts. Colleen?
You know, I have to always say something, but
Well, I was expecting it. It's a little late, but go ahead.
but for me, one of our biggest struggles was when I obeyed the gospel. Mike was raised Lutheran. I was raised Methodist, Baptist, whatever, and maybe Presbyterian in there too. But I learned the truth and I obeyed the truth, not knowing how he would react. And it was very hard. I invited him to come to the baptism. Do you want to go? He didn't. I hope it's okay. I don't care. Anyway.
I'm going to do it anyway. You'll be there or
I'm
not.
already into it, I guess.
Yeah,
so,
right.
But what got me through it was becoming good friends with an elder's wife.
Okay.
She helped me through that, and we had a great preacher and his wife that helped me through it, and then helped Mike through it. And he's an elder today. But it was a struggle. I was taking a 4-year-old and a newborn baby. I was very pregnant when I was baptized. And it was hard doing that all by myself, but church helped me. And I had someone to watch the baby, or I had someone to watch the 4-year-old if I had to go out. And I couldn't have done it without all of that. Mm-hmm. But the biggest thing was the elder's wife.
Sure. It's that support.
And God.
Yeah, okay. What's God using an elder's wife and helping you walk through that? And the support you have from the outside, you turn to somebody for help. And sometimes the change of attitude that comes from, I've decided I'm not leaving you. And there's a fearful time when you wonder, have I blown it so bad that she's going to leave me? And there were times that I thought Jan was going to leave me. And there was times she thought I was. And I remember one time I was in tears. I said, will you ever forgive me? And she said, how can I not forgive you after God has forgiven me of so much? I learned more about forgiveness from her than I had from nearly anybody else in my life. Mike?
What she just said is this Crystal got baptized twice.
Oh, in the womb and out of the womb. That's good.
But if it wasn't for this woman behind me, I wouldn't be here today.
Yeah. Okay. Has this been beneficial the second half as well? I'm assuming it was better than the first, but was it good? Okay, so then we are 2 minutes before. Thank you for being here tonight.
you all.
And
Thank
is
you.
it okay to wrap this up? Does anybody have a final thing you want to say or ask or? Not hearing anything. We are now adjourned. Okay, so let's pray again, all right? Lord, you are so good to us, and thank you. Thanks for giving Dale safety in coming here and for the time that we can share together. Thank you, Lord, for creating us like you did and that you have designed us for relationship, and help us to learn together in the next few hours that we have together, and we're investing life into this. I pray that you will strengthen our marriages, strengthen our families. For the ones who are not married, should that be your will, that they be married sometime, wonderful. And if not, provide contentment and excitement about life, how you have created us, not just for marriage relationship, but you've designed us for relationship. So help us to get the most out of what you've given us, and help us give you the glory in our relationships. Lord, we love you. And we want to grow, to be better at loving. So we pray that you, by your Spirit, will guide us by your word through our interaction and through life events that you use to train us and to help us to be more like you. Jesus, you are our King, and we yield ourselves to you and our relationships to you. It's in your name, to your glory, we pray. Amen.
Amen.